The moment your spouse becomes a stranger, the marriage usually ends long before anyone says goodbye. I never thought those words would describe my life, but everything changed on a rainy Thursday evening in Frisco, Texas. The day had already been exhausting. I left the office nearly 2 hours later than planned, and traffic along the highway moved like a parking lot. By the time I finally pulled into our driveway, the porch light was glowing against the wet pavement, and all I could think about was getting inside, taking off my jacket, and spending a few quiet minutes with my family. Instead, I walked straight into the worst moment of my life. As I approached the front door, I noticed voices coming from the dining room. Rebecca was inside with her friend Karen. I was about to enter when I heard my name. Instinctively, I paused. Not because I intended to listen, not because I was suspicious. Sometimes people simply stop when they hear themselves being discussed. I wish I had kept walking. I wish I had never married him, Rebecca said. For a second, I honestly thought I misunderstood. Rain tapped softly against the windows while my hand remained frozen on the doorknob. Karen said something too quietly for me to hear. Rebecca answered immediately. Every day with Logan feels like another reminder of a mistake I cannot undo. My chest tightened. The words were not shouted. They were not spoken in anger. Somehow that made them hurt even more. They sounded honest, thoughtful, like something she had believed for a very long time. I stood there in silence. 12 years of marriage suddenly felt very far away. I remembered our wedding day. I remembered carrying Sophie through the front door when she was born. I remembered late-night conversations about our future. Somewhere along the way, those memories had apparently become invisible to the person who shared them with me. Karen asked another question. This time I heard Rebecca clearly. Do you still love him? A long pause followed. Then Rebecca sighed. I do not even know who he is anymore. I lowered my eyes toward the porch. Rainwater dripped from the edge of the roof. For a moment, I considered opening the door and confronting the situation, asking questions, demanding explanations. Instead, I remained silent, because part of me understood exactly why she felt that way. During the past few years, I had become distant. I missed dinners. I forgot plans. I canceled weekends away. I spent too much time staring at my phone and not enough time paying attention to the people around me. From Rebecca's perspective, the evidence probably looked obvious. A husband who no longer cared. A marriage slowly falling apart. The problem was that she only knew half the story. Karen eventually left through the front entrance. I stepped back into the shadows before either woman noticed me. A few minutes later, I entered the house through the garage and acted as though I had just arrived. Rebecca greeted me with a tired smile. I returned it. We talked about ordinary things. Sophie's school schedule. A grocery list sitting on the kitchen counter. A neighborhood event happening next weekend. Every word felt surreal. Less than 10 minutes earlier, I had heard my wife describe our marriage as her greatest regret. Yet here we were discussing household chores. Later that evening, I sat alone at the dining room table, staring into darkness. The house was completely silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I kept replaying Rebecca's words over and over. I wish I had never married him. The sentence felt impossible to escape. Eventually, I opened a locked drawer and removed a folder nobody in my family knew existed. Inside were documents, schedules, payment records, and information connected to a responsibility I had been carrying alone for years. I stared at the folder for several seconds before closing it again. Because while Rebecca believed she understood exactly why our marriage was failing, she had absolutely no idea where I would be going before sunrise the next morning. The next morning, I left the house before anyone else woke up. The sky above Frisco was still dark, and a thin layer of fog hovered over the streets as I drove south. Most people would have assumed I was heading to the office early. That was exactly what Rebecca believed every time I left before sunrise. The truth was much more complicated. As I drove through the quiet morning traffic, her words continued echoing in my head. I wish I had never married him. The sentence had followed me all night. No matter how hard I tried to focus on the road, I kept hearing it. By the time I reached my destination, my stomach felt heavier than it had in years. The building stood between several medical offices on the edge of Dallas. It looked ordinary from the outside. Clean brick walls, large windows, a small parking lot, nothing that would attract attention. I parked near the back and sat in silence for a moment before going inside. The receptionist greeted me by name. That alone revealed how often I had been there. After signing a few forms, I took a seat in the waiting area. Around me, People quietly flipped through magazines or stared at their phones. Nobody seemed interested in conversation. Everyone carried their own concerns. 20 minutes later, a familiar voice called my name. I stood and followed Dr. Helen Parker down a hallway lined with framed photographs and certificates. She had known me for years. More importantly, she knew exactly why my life had changed so dramatically. Inside her office, she reviewed several documents before looking up. "You look exhausted," she said. I laughed softly. "That obvious?" She smiled sympathetically. "Only to someone who sees you every month." Her expression became more serious. "How are things at home?" I hesitated. Then I answered honestly. "Not good." She nodded as though she expected that response. We spent nearly an hour discussing appointments, schedules, financial arrangements, and future plans. Every conversation seemed to generate more responsibilities. Every solution created another problem that needed attention. By the time I left, half the morning had disappeared. I drove directly to work and spent the afternoon buried beneath meetings, project reviews, and deadlines. Around lunchtime, Rebecca sent a text message asking whether I remembered Sophie's school presentation scheduled for the following Thursday. My chest tightened immediately. I had completely forgotten. Not because I did not care. Because my mind had become a crowded warehouse filled with obligations. I replied and promised I would be there. Then I stared at the screen wondering whether she believed me. That evening, I arrived home nearly 40 minutes late. As soon as I walked through the front door, I could feel Rebecca's disappointment. She did not say anything at first. She simply glanced at the clock hanging above the kitchen doorway. Sometimes silence communicates more than words. During dinner, Sophie talked excitedly about a science project she was preparing. Rebecca listened carefully. I tried to focus, but my attention drifted more than once. Eventually, Sophie stopped talking and looked directly at me. "Dad, you missed the last part," she said. Embarrassment washed over me. "Sorry, the house felt quiet." Too quiet. I opened my laptop and reviewed several financial documents spread across the table. Numbers filled every page. Payment schedules, medical expenses, insurance statements, future projections. The reality was simple. The longer I kept this secret, the more difficult everything became. Yet revealing it would create problems of its own. Around 10:30, my phone vibrated. A message appeared on the screen from someone whose name Rebecca had never seen before. The text contained only 4 words. "Appointment confirmed for tomorrow." I stared at the message for several seconds before locking the screen. Because while Rebecca believed she already knew why I was slowly becoming a stranger inside my own marriage, she had absolutely no idea where I would be going again the following morning. The following morning, I left even earlier than usual. The streets were nearly empty as I drove toward Dallas beneath a gray sky. Most people would have looked at my schedule and assumed I was obsessed with work. Rebecca certainly did. From her perspective, every unexplained absence pointed in the same direction. She saw a husband choosing everything except his family. What she could not see were the places I went when nobody was watching. My first stop was not the office. It was a hospital. I parked in a familiar space and walked through automatic doors that had become part of my routine years ago. The receptionist greeted me by name. That simple detail always reminded me how much time I spent there. I took the elevator to the 4th floor and followed a corridor lined with photographs and quiet waiting areas. The smell of coffee and disinfectant filled the air. At the end of the hallway, I found the room I had visited countless times before. My father, Richard Mitchell, sat near the window reading a newspaper. Age and illness had changed him, but the determination in his eyes remained exactly the same. When he saw me enter, he folded the newspaper and smiled. "You should be at work," he said. I laughed softly. "Good morning to you too." We spent the next hour discussing treatment plans, upcoming appointments, and the endless paperwork that seemed to multiply every month. Richard always tried to make things sound easier than they were. That was one of the reasons I kept so much from Rebecca. My father hated feeling like a burden. He insisted on handling things alone long after it stopped being realistic. Years ago, I promised I would help him. That promise eventually became the center of my entire life. After leaving the hospital, I met briefly with attorney William Hayes. His office occupied the 2nd floor of a nearby building. Stacks of documents covered his desk. Most of them involved medical authorizations, financial planning, and future arrangements connected to my father's care. We reviewed several forms that required signatures. Every page seemed to represent another responsibility. Another commitment. Another expense. By the time I left, it was nearly noon. I finally arrived at work and spent the afternoon buried in meetings. Around 3 o'clock, my phone vibrated. A message from Rebecca appeared on the screen. It contained a photograph of Sophie standing beside a display board for her upcoming school project. Underneath the picture were 6 simple words. She hopes you can make it. I stared at the message longer than I should have. The guilt arrived immediately. Sophie deserved more than occasional appearances from a distracted father. Rebecca deserved more than excuses. Yet every time I thought I was close to solving one problem, another appeared. That evening, traffic delayed me again. When I finally pulled into the driveway, I could already see Rebecca through the front window. She was setting the dinner table. Sophie sat nearby working on school assignments. For a brief moment, the scene looked exactly like the life I wanted. A normal family, a normal evening, a normal marriage. Then I remembered the conversation I overheard outside that same house. During dinner, Rebecca asked whether I would be attending a neighborhood fundraiser the following weekend. I hesitated, only for a second, but she noticed. Rebecca always noticed. Her expression changed instantly. "You forgot again, did not you?" she asked. Sophie lowered her eyes toward her plate. I searched for an answer that would not become another lie. "I have a lot happening right now," I said quietly. Rebecca looked away and nodded. The disappointment on her face felt familiar. Too familiar. Later that night, after everyone went upstairs, I sat alone in the living room reviewing documents from the day. Medical records, appointment schedules, financial statements. The stack seemed larger than ever. I was about to put everything away when headlights appeared through the front window. A vehicle slowly entered the driveway. My heart immediately sank. Nobody was supposed to come here. Not at this hour. A moment later, the doorbell rang. I opened the door and froze. Standing on the porch was someone connected directly to the secret I had spent years protecting. And if Rebecca happened to come downstairs before that conversation ended, everything I had worked so hard to hide could disappear in a single night. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Standing on my porch was attorney William Hayes. Most people would have assumed it was a routine legal visit. The problem was that William never came to my house unless something important had happened. The look on his face confirmed it immediately. "William," I said quietly, "what are you doing here?" He glanced past me toward the hallway. "We need to talk." My stomach tightened. Before I could respond, I heard movement upstairs. Rebecca was still awake. That alone made me nervous. William noticed my reaction and lowered his voice. "It concerns your father." Those 4 words were enough. I stepped outside and quietly pulled the door closed behind me. Cool night air filled the driveway. The neighborhood remained silent except for the distant sound of passing traffic. William handed me a folder. "I came because I could not reach you." I looked down at the documents. Several pages were marked with notes and signatures. Others contained updated financial projections and treatment estimates. My chest felt heavier with every page I turned. "The costs increased again?" I asked. William nodded. "More than expected." I rubbed my forehead. For years, every conversation seemed to end the same way. More paperwork, more expenses, more decisions. None of them were easy. William studied me carefully. "How much longer do you plan on carrying this alone?" I laughed quietly, not because anything was funny, because I had asked myself the same question countless times. "As long as necessary," I answered. He looked unconvinced. "Your family deserves the truth." The statement lingered in the darkness between us. Deep down, I knew he was right. The problem was that the truth came with consequences. Once secrets are revealed, they cannot be hidden again. After William left, I remained outside for several minutes staring at the empty street. Porch lights glowed softly across neighboring houses. Somewhere nearby, a television flickered through a window. Ordinary families were ending ordinary days. Meanwhile, my life felt like a balancing act that grew more fragile every month. Eventually, I returned inside. Rebecca was waiting in the kitchen. Her arms were crossed. A half-finished cup of tea sat on the counter beside her. The moment she saw me, I knew she had questions. "Who was that?" she asked. I had rehearsed variations of this conversation for years. Partial truths, careful explanations, enough information to avoid lying without revealing everything. "Someone helping with a family matter," I said. The answer sounded weak even to me. Rebecca stared at me for several seconds. "A family matter?" she repeated. At almost 11 o'clock, I looked away. Her frustration was understandable. Every unexplained event became another piece of evidence supporting the story she already believed. A husband who no longer trusted his wife. A marriage filled with distance and secrets. "Logan," she said quietly, "do you realize how many times I have asked what is going on?" I remained silent. Not because I wanted to hurt her, because I did not know how to explain years of decisions in a single conversation. Rebecca shook her head. "I do not even know why I keep asking anymore." Those words hurt more than anger would have. Anger at least implies someone still cares enough to fight. Exhaustion is different. Exhaustion arrives after hope starts disappearing. She carried her tea upstairs and left me standing alone in the kitchen. I listened as her footsteps faded down the hallway. Then I sat at the table and opened the folder William had brought. Updated treatment schedules, financial obligations, legal authorizations. Every page represented another responsibility. Every page represented time that would have to come from somewhere. Around midnight, my phone vibrated. A text message appeared from Sophie. She was upstairs in her room, yet she had chosen to message instead of walking downstairs. That realization alone made me pause. The message was simple. "Dad, are you and Mom okay?" I stared at the screen for a long time. Eventually, I typed a reply. "We are working through some things." A minute later, another message appeared. "I just miss how things used to be." Those words stayed with me long after the conversation ended. Because Sophie had unknowingly summarized everything wrong with our family. We were all missing something. Rebecca missed the husband she thought she lost. Sophie missed the family we used to be. And I missed the version of myself that did not spend every day carrying secrets. As I gathered the documents and prepared to lock them away, a single envelope slipped from the folder and landed on the floor. I picked it up and froze. The return address belonged to a law office Rebecca had never mentioned. And judging by the words printed across the front, she had been planning something that could change our marriage forever. For several minutes, I sat alone staring at the envelope. I did not need to open it to understand what it meant. The law firm's name was enough. Rebecca had met with a divorce attorney. Somehow, seeing physical proof affected me differently than overhearing her conversation a few nights earlier. Hearing painful words was one thing. Holding evidence that she had already taken steps toward ending our marriage was something else entirely. I turned the envelope over in my hands before carefully placing it back inside the folder. Part of me wanted answers immediately. Another part understood that I had lost the right to demand explanations while hiding so much of my own life. The next morning, I woke before dawn as usual. Rebecca was still asleep. For a moment, I stood quietly beside the bed looking at her. 12 years of memories filled my mind. We were not perfect. No marriage ever is. But we had once been partners. Somewhere along the way, secrets and assumptions had built a wall between us. I left the house without waking her and drove toward Dallas. The hospital visit lasted longer than expected. My father had another series of consultations scheduled, and several doctors wanted to discuss future treatment options. Richard remained determined, as always. If anything, he spent more time worrying about me than himself. At one point, he looked across the room and said, "You look tired, son." I laughed softly. I wonder why. His smile faded. This cannot continue forever. I knew exactly what he meant. The appointments, the expenses, the constant balancing act between family, work, and responsibility. Before I could respond, a nurse entered with additional paperwork. The conversation ended, but his words stayed with me. Later that afternoon, I stopped by Attorney Hayes' office to sign several updated documents. When I arrived, he looked unusually serious. "There is something you should know," he said. My stomach immediately tightened. "What happened?" He slid a folder across the desk. "Nothing happened. Yet." I opened it and quickly realized what I was looking at. Financial summaries, medical projections, future obligations. The numbers were larger than I expected. Much larger. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. William folded his hands. "You have carried this for years, Logan. Nobody would blame you for asking for help." I almost smiled. The problem was that asking for help required revealing the truth. And revealing the truth would change everything. That evening, I returned home earlier than usual. For the first time in months, I wanted to be there before dinner started. As I entered the house, I heard voices in the kitchen. Rebecca and Sophie were talking. I paused when I heard my daughter's name mentioned. "Mom, are you and Dad getting divorced?" Sophie asked quietly. The question hit me like a truck. Silence followed, long enough to make my heart race. Then Rebecca answered. Why would you ask that? Sophie hesitated. Because neither of you seem happy anymore. I stood frozen in the hallway. Rebecca did not answer immediately. When she finally spoke, her voice sounded exhausted. I do not know what is going to happen. Those words hurt, but they also sounded honest. For the first time, I realized how much Sophie had been carrying too. Children always notice more than adults think. A few minutes later, I walked into the kitchen and both of them looked up. The conversation ended instantly. Dinner felt awkward. Everyone seemed trapped inside their own thoughts. Afterward, Sophie went upstairs while Rebecca cleaned the kitchen. I offered to help. She seemed surprised. We worked side by side in silence. Then something unexpected happened. As Rebecca opened a cabinet, a small lockbox slipped from an upper shelf and fell onto the counter. My heart stopped, because inside that box were copies of documents I never intended anyone to find. Rebecca looked at the box. Then she looked at me. Slowly, she reached toward the lid. And in that moment, I knew the secret I had spent years protecting was seconds away from being discovered. Rebecca's hand stopped on top of the lockbox. For a brief moment, neither of us moved. The kitchen suddenly felt smaller, quieter, as if the entire house was holding its breath. I knew exactly what was inside. Copies of medical records, financial statements, treatment schedules, insurance documents, years of information I never intended anyone else to see. Rebecca looked at me. What is this? She asked softly. I opened my mouth to answer, but no words came. After years of protecting the secret, I was completely unprepared for the moment it finally surfaced. Rebecca slowly lifted the lid. The first thing she saw was a stack of hospital documents. Her eyes narrowed in confusion. Then she picked up another folder. And another. The deeper she looked, the paler her expression became. Logan, she whispered. What am I looking at? I pulled out a chair and sat down. There was no point hiding anything anymore. The truth was already sitting on the kitchen counter. My father's records, I said quietly. Rebecca continued reading. I watched her eyes move across treatment dates, appointment schedules, payment confirmations, and specialist reports. Several minutes passed without a single word. Then she found the financial records. The room became completely silent. These numbers cannot be right, she said. I lowered my eyes. They are. She looked at me again. You paid all of this? I nodded. Most of it. Rebecca slowly sat down across from me. The shock on her face was impossible to miss. For how long? She asked. Almost 4 years. The answer seemed to hit her harder than anything else. She stared at me as if seeing a stranger. Not because she suddenly knew less about me. Because she suddenly realized how much she never knew in the first place. For years, she repeated. 4 years of appointments. For years of bills. For years of treatments. I nodded again. She looked back at the documents. And you never told me. There was no accusation in her voice. Only disbelief. Dad did not want anyone worrying about him. I explained. Especially you and Sophie. Rebecca laughed softly, but there was sadness in it. So instead, you carried all of it alone. I did not answer. The silence was answer enough. She continued reading through the files. Then she stopped at a page near the bottom of the stack. Her eyes widened. You sold your retirement investments. I looked away. Yes. To help pay for this. Yes. Another silence followed. The kitchen clock ticked steadily on the wall. Outside, a light rain had started falling against the windows. Rebecca placed the document back onto the counter and covered her mouth with one hand. For years she had believed I was choosing work over family. Choosing distance over connection. Choosing everything except the people who loved me. Now she was staring at proof that the reality had been entirely different. All those late nights, she said quietly. The weekends. The canceled trips. I nodded. Most of them were connected to this. Rebecca looked down at the stack of papers. I thought you stopped caring. Her voice cracked slightly. The words hurt, but not because they were cruel. Because I understood why she believed them. From her perspective, the evidence supported that conclusion. She only lacked the missing pieces. Maybe I should have told you sooner, I admitted. Maybe, she said. But I should have asked different questions too. For the first time in years, neither of us sounded angry. Just tired. Tired of assumptions. Tired of distance. Tired of carrying stories that no longer matched reality. A few moments later, footsteps appeared on the staircase. Sophie entered the kitchen wearing headphones around her neck. She immediately noticed the documents covering the counter and the unusual expressions on our faces. What happened? She asked. Rebecca and I exchanged a look. The truth had already changed everything between us. Now it was about to change everything for Sophie too. And as she walked closer to the table, I realized the hardest conversation of my life was only beginning. Sophie stopped a few feet from the table and looked at the documents scattered across the counter. Her eyes moved from Rebecca to me and then back again. She immediately sensed the tension in the room. What is going on? She asked. Nobody answered right away. Rebecca slowly pulled out a chair beside her. Come sit down, she said gently. Sophie frowned. That usually means something serious. She sat anyway. I took a deep breath. After years of hiding the truth, there was no reason to continue. Sophie deserved honesty. Rebecca slid several documents across the table. Sophie glanced at the hospital logos and medical terminology. Confusion quickly appeared on her face. Whose records are these? She asked. Grandpa's, I replied quietly. She looked up. Grandpa Richard? I nodded. The next 30 minutes changed everything. We explained the treatments, the appointments, the financial responsibilities, the years of hospital visits. We explained why I left so early, came home so late, and constantly seemed distracted. Sophie listened without interrupting. Occasionally, she looked down at the paperwork. Occasionally, she looked at me. By the time we finished, tears had formed in her eyes. You did all of that by yourself? She asked softly. I shrugged. I tried. Sophie shook her head. Why did nobody tell me? Because your grandfather wanted you focused on your life, I said. School, friends, your future. Sophie looked away. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then she asked a question I never expected. Dad, were you really okay all this time? The room became completely silent. Rebecca slowly turned toward me. It was the first time either of them had asked about me instead of the situation. The truth was complicated. Not always, I admitted. Sophie lowered her eyes. Rebecca looked as though she wanted to say something, but could not find the words. Later that night, after Sophie went upstairs, Rebecca and I remained at the kitchen table. The stack of documents still sat between us. Yet they no longer felt like secrets. They felt like evidence. Evidence of how completely we had misunderstood each other. Rebecca picked up one of the old appointment schedules. I remember this date, she said quietly. You missed our anniversary dinner. I nodded. I know. She looked at the document again. You were at the hospital. Yes. A few moments later, she picked up another page. And this weekend? I immediately recognized it. That was Sophie's school fundraiser. Rebecca stared at the paperwork. I was angry at you for weeks after that. I smiled sadly. I remember. One by one, she began matching memories to documents. Every canceled plan, every missed event, every unexplained absence. The meaning of those memories was changing in real time. Things she once viewed as neglect now looked completely different. Eventually, Rebecca covered her face with both hands. I cannot stop thinking about what I said. I knew exactly what she meant. The conversation she had with Karen. The words I overheard outside the house. She looked up. I told people I regretted marrying you. Her voice cracked slightly. And all this time you were sacrificing everything for your family. I wanted to tell her not to blame herself. The reality was more complicated than that. We both made mistakes. She made assumptions. I built walls. Neither of us handled things perfectly. We cannot change the past, I said. Rebecca nodded slowly. Then she surprised me. But maybe we can change what happens next. The statement hung in the air between us. For the first time in years, the future felt uncertain in a different way. Not because everything was falling apart, because something might still be worth saving. The next afternoon, I received a call from Dr. Helen Parker. Her tone immediately told me something had changed. I stepped into an empty conference room at work to take the call. Logan, she said carefully. It had not disappeared completely, but it was different. Softer. It was a small smile, but it felt genuine. During dinner, Sophie talked about school, while Rebecca asked questions about my week. The conversation was simple, ordinary, yet it reminded me of things I thought we had lost forever. The next morning, we drove to the hospital together. Nobody spoke much during the drive. The sky was clear, and sunlight reflected across the buildings as we entered Dallas. When we arrived, Dr. Helen Parker met us near the elevators and guided us toward a private conference room. My father was already there. He sat near the window wearing a light blue sweater and holding a cup of coffee. When he saw us enter, his expression softened immediately. Sophie rushed over and hugged him first. Rebecca followed. I remained near the doorway for a moment, watching. My father smiled more during those first few minutes than I had seen in months. Once everyone settled into their seats, the room became quiet. Richard placed his coffee cup on the table and folded his hands together. "There is a reason I asked all of you to come," he began. His voice was calm, steady. "And before I say anything else, I need to apologize." Rebecca looked confused. "Your husband has done more for me than anyone will ever know. He sacrificed time, money, opportunities, and peace of mind because he refused to let me face this alone." Rebecca lowered her eyes. Sophie quietly wiped away tears. My father then looked directly at me. "And I am sorry for that." Nobody laughed, but everyone understood exactly what he meant. The conversation continued for nearly 2 hours. We talked openly about everything: medical plans, financial realities, family responsibilities, future expectations. By the time the meeting ended, it felt as though years of silence had finally been broken. As we prepared to leave, Rebecca stayed behind for a moment. She spoke quietly with Dr. Parker while Sophie and I walked toward the elevator with Richard. A few minutes later, Rebecca joined us. Her eyes looked red, but her expression seemed lighter than before. That evening, after we returned home, she found me sitting alone on the back porch watching the sunset. The neighborhood was quiet. A gentle breeze moved through the trees. Rebecca sat beside me without saying anything. Several minutes passed. Then she reached into her pocket and handed me a folded piece of paper. I opened it slowly. The moment I saw the letterhead at the top of the page, my heart skipped a beat. It was from the same divorce attorney whose envelope I had discovered weeks earlier. And what Rebecca told me next changed everything. I unfolded the paper and immediately recognized the law firm's letterhead. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The sunset painted the backyard in shades of gold and orange while I stared at the document in my hands. Then Rebecca finally broke the silence. "I never filed anything," she said quietly. I looked up. She continued before I could respond. "I scheduled a consultation because I thought our marriage was already over. I thought I needed to understand my options." Her eyes filled with emotion. "But after everything I learned, I never went back." I lowered my gaze to the paper again. The document confirmed exactly what she said. A consultation. Nothing more. No filing. No legal action. No final decision. Just a woman who believed she had reached the end of her marriage and did not know what else to do. Rebecca looked toward the horizon. "I spent years convincing myself that you stopped caring about us." Her voice trembled slightly. "The truth is that I stopped trying to understand what was happening." I shook my head. "That is not fair to you." She looked at me. "Maybe not, but it is true. For the first time in years, there were no walls between us. No assumptions. No hidden fears. Just honesty. The kind we should have shared long ago." The following months were not perfect. Real life rarely works that way. We still had difficult conversations. We still carried scars from everything that happened. But something important had changed. We were finally facing challenges together instead of separately. Sophie seemed happier too. The tension she had quietly carried for so long slowly disappeared. Family dinners became normal again. Conversations lasted longer. Laughter returned to the house. Even small things felt different. One Saturday afternoon, I found myself helping Sophie prepare for a school presentation while Rebecca worked nearby in the kitchen. It was an ordinary moment, yet I appreciated it more than I ever would have before. Sometimes people only understand the value of simple moments after nearly losing them. Richard's condition remained stable for the next several months. He continued attending appointments, and for the first time, Rebecca accompanied us to many of them. She built her own relationship with the reality I had been carrying alone. Watching her support both my father and me reminded me why I fell in love with her in the first place. One evening, several months later, our family gathered on Richard's back porch. The weather was perfect. Sophie was laughing at one of her grandfather's stories while Rebecca sat beside me watching the sunset. Richard looked around at all of us and smiled. "This is what matters," he said. Nobody argued. Nobody needed to. We all understood. Looking back now, I realize how close we came to losing everything. Not because of a single mistake. Not because of one argument. Because silence slowly replaced communication. Assumptions replaced understanding. Distance replaced connection. The truth is that neither Rebecca nor I were villains in our story. We were simply two imperfect people carrying burdens we did not know how to share. Sometimes love does not disappear. Sometimes it simply gets buried beneath fear, responsibility, exhaustion, and misunderstanding. The hardest lesson I learned was that protecting people is not always the same as helping them. And the hardest lesson Rebecca learned was that conclusions reached without the full story can create wounds that never needed to exist. Today, when I think about everything that happened, I no longer focus on the pain. I focus on what survived it. Trust rebuilt. A family reunited. A marriage given a second chance. And if there is one thing I hope people take away from this story, it is that the truth is often much larger than what we see on the surface. Before this story ends, I would genuinely love to know your thoughts. If you were in Rebecca's position, what would you have done after discovering the truth? And if you were in mine, would you have kept the secret for so long? Share your perspective because every family sees situations differently. And if stories about relationships, forgiveness, family, and second chances resonate with you, consider joining us for more journeys like this one, because sometimes another story can remind us of lessons we never knew we needed.